It's my pleasure to introduce a movie provided to us by Carolyn Harris. She's a beef producer and also a natural resource economist. What a great combination. I'm really looking forward to hearing not just what she has to say in the movie, but also particularly for her joining us in the forum in a little while's time. Carolyn did ask me to say that her movie is pretty real and raw, and that doesn't matter, does it? It's the information that counts. So please sit back, enjoy her presentation for the moment, and then after that, we'll be hearing from Alex. So thank you very much. Over to Carolyn.
Good afternoon. I would like to share a good news climate change story. Agriculture is part of the solution. In February this year, Michael Guerin, the CEO of AgForce Queensland Farmers, said, "Agriculture is the only industry in Australia to have meaningfully reduced its emissions footprint to date. This paper will use the framework social capital, financial capital and natural capital to describe how the land managers of Northern Australia have achieved this. Land managers' social capital includes experience, education and their ability to listen to their land. Financial capital includes property equity, savings, borrowed money and built infrastructure. Natural capital includes soils and rock, grasses, trees and shrubs, biodiversity, underground microbial life, rainfall, above ground and underground water, wildlife, natural cycles, ecosystems and the surrounding air." There are two types of natural capital, renewable and non-renewable. Agriculture can improve renewable natural capital in a long-term sustainable and profitable state for the benefit of the wider population. When the first fleet arrived in Port Jackson in 1788, they had little knowledge of any form of agriculture, and what knowledge they possessed was of English farming methods developed in a land with predictable rainfall and generally fertile soils. Australia is an old and eroded landscape with a notoriously variable climate. Indeed, as Dorothea McKellar wrote, a land of drought and flooding rains. Due to the lack of significant knowledge, degradation of the land took place as the new settlers struggled to make a living in land they did not understand. Legislators also had no prior knowledge of the conditions, and much well-meaning legislation had unintended and perverse outcomes, which also led to land degradation. Even now, legislation dealing with natural resources has unintended and perverse outcomes. For example, the Murray-Darling Basin Plan precludes some regularly used regenerative practices such as ponding to regenerate scalds. In 1999, the Queensland Government introduced the Vegetation Management Act, or VMA, which set strict guidelines for the management of vegetation on freehold and leasehold land in the state. Controlling regrowth, clearing, fodder harvesting and thinning were all restricted. However, this legislation ensured that emissions from its land use change and forestry, or LUCF, activities would be reduced over time and would enable Australia to meet its obligations under the Kyoto Protocol and more recently the Paris Accord. This was a great outcome for the nation. However, this public good was achieved at a private cost, which heavily impacted Queensland land managers through lost opportunity cost by restricting future planned development of their land and restricting control of regrowth and thickening. No compensation has been paid by either the state or federal governments. Australian land managers gradually moved away from the English paradigms and through observation learned to read and listen to their own particular land and pastures, noting that no two properties are exactly the same. Land managers improved their social capital through education, taking the ideas from science and other innovators and adapting them to best suit their land. With improved social capital, they were able to improve their financial capital. The successful land managers have gathered around them a highly skilled set of advisors who have helped to build a more robust and resilient agricultural enterprises. Armed with this new knowledge, land managers were on a mission to improve their natural capital. They took on board the need for world agriculture to become sustainable, as highlighted in the Brundtland Report, Our Common Future, which was published in 1987. A number of methods have been put forward as a means of achieving sustainability and regeneration. Holistic management, natural sequencing farming, regenerative agriculture, to name a few. Organisations such as the Commonwealth Scientific Industrial Research Organisation, CSIRO, Meat and Livestock Australia, MLA, Australian Red Meat Advisory Council, ARMAC, and a dedicated group of agricultural and rangeland scientists have provided an invaluable work to assist land managers across Northern Australia to achieve increased natural capital. This increased natural capital includes increased carbon sequestration in vegetation and soils, and healthier ecosystems with reduced emissions as measured by the greenhouse gas inventory. Agricultural annual greenhouse emissions have reduced from 91.6 million tonnes of CO2e in the year to December 1990 to 72.9 million tonnes for the year to December 2020. The introduction of the VMA reduced LULUCF activities on between 50 to 60 million hectares of woodland and open forest in Queensland. This has resulted in a significant decrease in LULUCF, which changed from an emitter of 186.1 million tonnes, or 29% of annual greenhouse gases in 1990, to providing a net carbon sink of minus 24.5 million tonnes, 24.5 million tonnes of CO2e in 2020, shown on the pale blue line at the bottom. Given the significant contribution Queensland agriculture has made to this result due to the VMA, it is appropriate to consider the LULUCF in the net effect of agriculture. Don't you love acronyms? Due to a lack of baseline data, it is difficult to know the true contribution that the unaccounted for carbon sink provided by vegetation in Northern Australia is making. A carbon emission audit is needed to quantify this. Audits carried out on individual properties indicate that many agricultural landscapes are already carbon neutral or better. Work from the Oxford Martin School at Oxford University had devised a new metric, GWP star, which is a more accurate measure of the warming effect of methane in the atmosphere due to its relatively short-lived impact. The University of California, Davis agrees with this research, and the Climate Council of Australia also suggests that the short-lived nature of methane should be taken into account. This work suggests that the methane effect on global warming of the world's ruminant herd and the natural wetlands has been overstated. There are a number of examples of regenerative practices that have increased natural capital on properties. The University of Queensland study at Kyoto near Moree showed a net sink of minus 26,682 tonnes of CO2e in the year 2017-18 for a mixed farming enterprise of irrigated cotton, dryland crops, cattle and forestry. On Warina Downs near Dalby, an irrigated cotton enterprise, changing the farming method to zero-till in 1990 improved the soil carbon from 0.05% to 0.08% over a 10-year period on soils naturally low in carbon. The following studies were carried out by Soils for Life. At Culloden, near Monto, changed to rotational grazing, cool burning, regeneration of effective tree-grass balance to achieve a successful cattle, carbon and forestry enterprise. On Glenelg, near Mundagalala, introduction of a conservative stocking rate, clearing of dense woody vegetation and grazing pressure being controlled through exclusion fencing, all led to improvement in water infiltration, reduced soil erosion and increased habitat for grassland-dependent biodiversity. At Bukhara Plains, Brewarrina, cell grazing was used to allow infiltration on extensive degraded clay pans, combined with holistic management to balance stocking rate with pasture availability. Farm tourism is being introduced to ensure the business is viable regardless of rainfall. Betaloo Station near Elliot on the Barkly Tableland invested in a reliable water supply reticulated across the land with smaller paddocks to enable all productive country to be used. Delivering time-controlled planned rotational grazing on a significant scale is an innovative vision for Northern Australia. At Three Rivers Station, Meekatharra, mining operations had interrupted pastoral operation, so it was decided to destock while mining took place. Working with the mining companies, it has been possible to halt the decline and accelerate the generation of the rangelands. The common theme through these case studies is that land managers have used and adapted different methods to suit the particular characteristics of each landscape. Other benefits, such as the declining trend in emissions from agriculture and the increasing offset of LULUCF practices, will give breathing space for other greenhouse gas emitters to find viable methods of reducing emissions or developing capture and storage or reuse. Regeneration of pastures and healthy ecosystems will assist Australia's unique wildlife to prosper. Greater ground cover will reduce erosion and will increase the stock of carbon sequestered in vegetation and soils. The vast northern rangelands will provide an enormous amount of the ecosystem services the rest of the country requires to sustain life. World population is projected to increase to 9.7 billion by 2050. It will be necessary to increase the productivity of all forms of agriculture around the world. It will be a long time before food manufactured in a laboratory is accessible or acceptable to the world population, nor will the limited supply of arable land be sufficient to grow the vegetable and edible grain and pulse crops needed without further areas of LULUCF being cleared, thus increasing emissions. Always remembering that animal grazing is mostly carried out on non-arable land. In the eyes of our near neighbours, the vast northern Australian rangelands represent a great underutilised resource. Already countries such as Indonesia and Vietnam, with growing populations and limited land resources, are sourcing live cattle from Northern Australia, effectively using our resource as their breeder paddock. The inevitable pressure from these neighbours will result in the development of further reliable water supplies to support grazing across vast areas of previously unused native rangelands for red meat production. Water storage for development of the pockets of arable soils suitable for intensive agriculture will be required. Large-scale investment of foreign financial capital will inevitably be required. In order to withstand overwhelming international need for increased development, to protect the really wild and remote wilderness areas, and to ensure sustainable development of the northern rangelands, continued wise use of the three types of capital will be required. As a matter of some urgency, Australians should have a conversation about setting the ground rules to ensure that the Australian nation reaps due reward from the future development and that wilderness areas are cherished and the natural capital maintained. Grazing will be the dominant use in the northern Australian rangelands. Australian land managers have demonstrated their ability to regenerate our rangelands and to reduce agriculture's carbon footprint. As the late Major General Michael Jeffrey so eloquently wrote, Australia can play a leading role in showing the rest of the world how inherently infertile soils in a difficult climate can be managed to meet the world's sustainable development goals for land and soils. In conclusion, agriculture is part of the solution, and agriculture in Northern Australia is making a significant contribution to reducing global emissions of greenhouse gases through a continued investment in natural capital. The red meat protein produced from the Northern Australian rangelands will be a vital source of nutrition for the ever-increasing world population. Thank you for listening.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks for that video. Carolyn joins me here downstairs. We're having a few technical issues at the hub. but we're getting on top of those. So, Carolyn, we're going to go to the live Q&A now. Ken Hodgkinson has asked a question of you. It says, rainfall varies in effectiveness for the plant growth. Is it worthwhile correcting rainfall by dividing rainfall by evaporation?
Yes, I think it probably could be done. Just add that to the many other jobs we have to do. But yes, technically it certainly can be done.
Okay, great. So that's a yes, Ken. Yes, you can do that. Yep. Now, Wendy Williams has put a question in here. Wendy, thank you. Are there any records of soil temps for the 2019 floods?
Not that there may be for the northern, it'd be a question that would be fine for the drought recovery people that looked after the floods in 2019, and or somebody from up there in the Gulf country where that saw it. But yes, now somebody was talking about that today.
Yes,
earlier,
actually, and NRRA, of course, one of our major sponsors, they were there.
Yes, that's what I was thinking of actually.
And I think Matthew's made it a little clearer for us. He's saying those questions were for Chelsea, I think,
right.
because we dropped out here in Longreach and I've been flitting between screens. So thank you very much, Matthew. Chelsea's here. We might have to save those questions. We won't get rid of them, and we'll come back to them. If your question is for Carolyn, can you please just give it an extra star so that we can be sure whose is whose? This one looks, here we go. So Susan, oops, they're jumping around all over the place. Susan Orgel asks, exciting to hear that you are collecting soil organic carbon data. Does this sound like it's a question for you?
No.
Another one for Chelsea, perhaps.
Oh, well, generally it's people are, yes, we are collecting carbon. The different examples that I used, it's a bit difficult because we didn't see the examples. A lot of people are collecting data. There was, and this is repeating what the people that did see the presentation, there was a study, the chief study that I grabbed hold of was one the University of Queensland did on a property called Keata near Moree, and they found that there was 26,000 odd tonnes of CO2e, minus 26,000 odd tonnes, which in fact is a sink. So it was that amount of tonnage better than carbon neutral. And that was on a irrigated cotton property with also dryland cropping and cattle and some timber reserve. So that was, and the other very interesting thing in that study was that they found that when cotton actually got to the point of export, so including the carbon footprint of the ginning, that it still was slightly carbon negative. So it was a small sink at the point of export.
Okay.
So very good news for irrigated cotton, which I think has surprised a lot of people.
There's often not good news for irrigated cotton, is there? No. So Riley Guyett has a question. I'm pretty sure this one's for you. Do you think there are any types of natural capital which are lagging behind in being preserved or developed?
There are. It's a bit of a mosaic. Like every industry, we have our laggards. Somebody was talking about them this morning. And I think agriculture in particular, we follow you follow the innovators, and then there are people the early adopters, and then we do have our people that you really don't want to know. But so yes, there are patches of natural capital that we're not perhaps on top of. In Queensland, we've been very restricted by our the Veg Management Act, or VMA. So yes, there are areas. I just can't think of putting the finger on one in particular at the moment. So I'll have to leave that one. Oh,
okay.
My favourite acronym.
Oh, what does that mean? LULUCF,
isn't it a doozy? It's land use change and forestry.
Right. I've learned something today. Okay. So John used that acronym. This is probably the last question we'll have time for.
John Brisbane.
He
Yeah,
said it stopped property owners from clearing their country, which would have released huge amount of carbon and resulted in massive landscape deterioration. Shouldn't farmers avoid arguing to receive payments for their avoided clearing, or would they be happy to receive invoices for their damage to country? I'm wondering if that's actually more of a comment than a question. That's
yes.
how you read that one too?
Yes, that is. And I totally, absolutely, totally disagree. You can clear land, you can manage land. Trees aren't a complete sacred cow. It's a balanced ecosystems are what we need, and that's what we've been working towards for many years now.
Okay, unfortunately, we're not going to get to Carly Drew's question, but Carly, please keep your question there at the front of mind and you can put it to the group later. Thank you very much for running down the stairs to join me. We're nearly there today.
At least I didn't trip.
Exactly.